am so happy to be here today to talk to you as the newest division director within BARDA, as the director of the Influenza and Emerging Infectious Diseases Division. And so just to level set, I know most of you are already aware that influenza is an ever-present pandemic threat, but we really think about this almost every day within the division, because we not only see seasonal influenza every single year causing millions of infections and thousands of hospitalizations, but we also have to be concerned about that pandemic threat. And so what you see on the right of that pyramid is something that could occur if it was a 1918-like Spanish influenza pandemic. And to put some of those numbers into perspective, in the first 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, we actually saw about 3.7 million hospitalizations over that time, but with some very strict isolation measures in place. So really, we need to be prepared for the next COVID-19 pandemic. However, it just might be caused by flu. However, we're in a much better place for flu than we were for COVID, where we have a number of licensed seasonal and also pandemic vaccines. We have a number of medical countermeasures available to treat outpatients with influenza. So we're really focused on addressing the gaps. Some of the biggest gaps, of course, of making sure that we have the manufacturing capacity and a number of vaccines licensed to meet the needs of a pandemic should it occur. We also want to make sure, work on better influenza vaccines. Can we find a vaccine that has a longer length of protection, and so we might not need a seasonal influenza vaccine every single year? And then in the therapeutic space, we really want to make sure that we have medical countermeasures that can treat the entire spectrum of disease. So another thing that we do within the division is we really think about response first, right? So we know that if we are called to respond, we need to have US-based manufacturing that is also sustainable, just like Chris talked about. Sustainability is incredibly important. So what do we do to prepare for that eventuality? Well, we have flexible agreements already in place with our FDA-licensed manufacturers for those vaccines. We really work to develop new and improved medical countermeasures, and we want to make sure that everybody within the United States will have access to whatever that we produce. And so, really to focus on response, I really want to talk about the Medical Countermeasure for Pandemic Influenza Response Program. And this team within the division really focuses on that response every single day. So they work with CDC and our USDA partners on surveillance, really monitoring what is happening in both humans and zoonotic influenza viruses globally. They work with the WHO and the other collaborating centers on the development of candidate vaccine viruses, and they work with our licensed manufacturers to create some bulk antigen and develop those seed lots. They store pre-pandemic vaccines within a stockpile and test them continually for stability. And they also conduct clinical trials to make sure that anything that we are stockpiling is both safe and immunogenic. And all of this is to make sure that we have our pre-emergency use authorization documentation up to date with FDA. And, of course, our ultimate goal is to have the vaccines available as fast as possible and to have enough doses to dose the entire U.S. population in as quick a timeline as possible. So, how do they go about doing this? Well, the pillar of our response program is the pre-pandemic influenza vaccine stockpile, otherwise known as MPIVs. And it is their goal to stockpile enough vaccine to vaccinate the critical infrastructure workforce, which includes healthcare workers and first responders. And they do this by stockpiling pre-pandemic vaccines and monitoring them for stability. And they also make sure that that stockpile is optimized for whatever is actually currently circulating, with, of course, with our biggest goal of providing broad cross-protective immunity. But what does that actually mean, right? So prior to the BARDA response program, what would happen is we would have a novel virus that would come into the US, and what would happen is that a new candidate vaccine virus would have to be developed, and this can take anywhere from 6 weeks up to 3 months. Potency reagents have to be developed to allow those vaccines to actually be released. That can take an additional 3 to 6 months as well. Sometimes that can go concurrently. But additional time, and all of that the response program is able to do in advance, right? So they already have vaccine seeds that are developed. Bulk production is done for some of these vaccines, and then they already have some of that clinical data establishing that these are safe and immunogenic vaccines. So over the years, since this program was started, the vaccine strain library has really greatly increased over the years. So of course we have a lot of H5, which we know has been circulating since at least, for a very long time throughout globally, but we also have a healthy stockpile of H7 viruses. But we're not only focused on what is circulating zoonotically, we also look at something that could actually reemerge, such as the H2 virus. And I'm really happy to report that we have dosed our first patient in a clinical trial for a pre-pandemic H2 vaccine to really understand, can we protect against a historic virus that could potentially reemerge in the human population. And so this program, like I said, has been incredibly successful. And so in 2005, when BARDA was started up, we had no effective pandemic response capability. There were 2 U.S. licensed influenza vaccines and only one vaccine technology, eggs, to produce those vaccines. And so when BARDA was started, we had some really big goals that we really wanted to meet. We wanted to make sure that we had a first dose of vaccine if it was a known virus within 2 to 3 months. And if we had to generate a new vaccine seeds, we gave us an extra few months, 4 to 5 months to first dose. And with an ultimate goal of having 600 million doses of pandemic vaccine within 7 months. And to meet those goals, BARDA has really done an incredible amount of work. We have multiple licensed seasonal influenza vaccines. In addition, we've licensed 3 pandemic vaccines that didn't exist before, and we have 3 different technologies for producing these vaccines, so we're not solely reliant on eggs for production of those vaccines. And really to show this response capability at work is I really wanted to highlight what we have done to respond to H5N1 that has been circulating in wild and domesticated birds for the last couple of years within the United States. So early in 2022, H5N1 was detected in wild birds and not followed long after in the commercial poultry flocks. And more concerning, in April of 2022, the first human case of H5N1 in the United States was found. So by May of that year, we had already contracted with our US-based licensed manufacturers to produce some H5 vaccine. So in the second half of 2022, H5N1 continued to circulate, and it also crossed over into both aquatic and terrestrial mammals. And we actually awarded contracts in September of 2022 to CSL Seqirus and GSK to really test the immunogenicity and safety of their H5 vaccines. I'm really happy to report that both of those trials are fully enrolled as of this month. So, of course, our work did not stop in 2023. As the virus also continued to circulate, we also acquired additional bulk lots of H5 vaccine. And we also awarded a contract to do a BARDA-sponsored H5 mix and match clinical trial, really mixing different adjuvants with our H5 vaccine to understand how best to use what we have within the stockpile. And so this is a significant amount of work that we're doing prior to it actually being a pandemic each and every year. So going back a step, right, so after COVID-19, the goals have changed as they should. We have a lot of lessons learned from COVID-19. And so, of course, we really need to think of where is this program going in the future. So really driven by the National Biodefense Strategy, we are moving towards having a first vaccine dose ready to go into human arms in less than 100 days after recognition of a pandemic virus, and within 120 days to have enough doses to meet the U.S. population needs. This is, much bigger goals that we are really looking to move forward into. And so we're doing this by working, the response team works hand in hand with the vaccine development team within the division. And so we're really looking to improve the vaccines that we already have. One of the ways that we're looking forward is to develop common immune assays and correlates of protection for these vaccines to make the development that much easier if we have to really develop these vaccines on the fly. We're also taking a risk-based approach to determining which vaccine seeds to develop each and every year. We want to, we want to support the clinical trial, continue to support the clinical trials as we take on new vaccines within the portfolio, and we really want to understand how best to move those forward. And then, of course, we're looking to modernize those influenza vaccines that we're bringing on. And this is one of the main goals of the vaccine development team. So, of course, what they're looking to do is to develop flexible and better influenza vaccines. So what do I mean by flexible? So Chris touched on this a little bit. But again, it's really to meet that National Biodefense Strategy goal of having a new vaccine ready to go within 100 days of a new pandemic virus of potential. And so having that ability to pivot from one virus to the next is incredibly important. We also want to find a vaccine with greater efficacy. So I already mentioned a little bit about having a longer length of protection, but what about all of our licensed vaccines actually take 2 doses to provide full protection? Could we have a single-dose pandemic vaccine? This is something that we're always on the lookout for. And of course, we need to make sure that we have the manufacturing capacity available in the United States to meet our needs and to meet that 100-day mission, which is which is something that needs quite a bit of work as of right now. We're also looking at alternative vaccine administrations. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, the needles and syringes were never a bottleneck, but that was only because BARDA and the ASPR teams put a significant amount of work to make sure that that was not a reason why you could not get vaccinated. And so reducing our reliance on needles and syringes can really help us respond to the next pandemic. So I'm happy to report that we have a fairly robust portfolio right now of alternative vaccine administration technologies. Number one, we're funding VAXS, and they have an adjuvanted pandemic vaccine that they are providing through a high-density microarray patch, and we will be funding them on a phase 1 clinical trial that should hopefully start in the near future. We are happy to support AstraZeneca, who is presenting their mRNA vaccine through a microneedle patch system in partnership with VAXS. And then AHI is using their self-amplifying mRNA vaccine and presenting it through an intranasal route of administration. Right now, the portfolio is open to an oral vaccine, so if you have that technology available, please come and talk to us. Moving over into the mRNA portfolio, of course, we learned during the COVID pandemic that mRNA really is the fastest technology to have vaccines ready to go into humans as quickly as possible. And so we have a number of different programs in this space as of right now. Number one is Arcturus Therapeutics, who we are working with them on their mRNA vaccine, really targeting H5 and having a freeze-dried formulation so that we can reduce that cold chain need that it can be quite hard on the current mRNA vaccines that we have available now. And I've already talked about the AHI and AstraZeneca programs that we have partnered with them through our partnership also with the Department of Defense and JPEO. But looking forward into the future, we're really going to be expanding what we're doing in the mRNA space. So earlier this summer, we released a notice of intent talking about 2 different programs for mRNA vaccines. So I'm really happy to report that the near-term effort has already been announced through our rapid response vehicle, so please check it out. And this is really about getting some of the licensed US-based manufacturers of mRNA vaccines on contract today, so if there is an influenza pandemic tomorrow, we have these contracts in place and are ready to go, before day 1, essentially. And we really want to work with them to generate the data that FDA is going to need to be able to respond quickly in the event of a pandemic. Now, our long-term effort that was announced in the same notice of intent is not quite out ready to be responded to yet, but what I just want to highlight and have you all keep an eye out for it, because when we say long-term, we mean, I'm talking 20 plus years. We want this to be a partner that will walk through all of the next 3 pandemics with us. So not only do we want to work with them to get a seasonal vaccine licensed, we want to work with them to get pandemic vaccines licensed and also continually exercise their capability to respond to a novel virus. So it may not just be flu that you're working on, but it might be maybe West Nile. West Nile might be what is causing the part. So the concern at that time. So we're really hoping to find a long-term partner with that effort. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled. So as I've discussed, everything that we're doing is really driven by the National Biodefense Strategy, which is really about making sure that safe and effective therapeutics and vaccines are available within 100 days. And so that applies not only to the vaccines that I've already just discussed, but it also applies to the therapeutics. And so the therapeutics has a bit of a different focus, which is really making sure that we have medical countermeasures available for the entire spectrum of disease, from pre-exposure prophylaxis all the way to those hospitalized with an influenza infection. And so we have a number of antivirals that are available to treat outpatients, and we're always on the lookout for new antivirals, but we really want to focus on some of the things that are critical gaps, such as pre-exposure prophylaxis. We do have licensed vaccines, but they don't work in everybody, right? So we have immune-compromised patients or even the elderly who do not respond well and can still suffer severe consequences from an influenza infection even after being fully vaccinated. And so we really want to find a therapeutic that can maybe be used as an adjunctive therapy to a vaccine to provide that complete protection. And then for hospitalized patients with influenza, we really want to find something that is not an antiviral. So again, we want to take that pathogen-agnostic approach and use a host-directed therapeutic. And so since we're not targeting the virus, we really want to find a drug that can treat acute respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS. So we're looking for a drug that can treat ARDS caused not only by influenza, but by other viral pathogens, bacterial pathogens, or even a chemical agent. And so I'm really happy to talk about a phase 2 screening trial that BARDA will be conducting for the treatment of ARDS, and we will be choosing 3 different drugs to put into this clinical trial, all host-directed therapeutics that will be threat agnostic. And the idea is that in this phase 2 trial, we will generate the data so that we can really design a pivotal phase 3 trial, of which we know historically there's been a lot of failure. So we're hoping this trial can provide that data that may lead to success. We're hoping to do that by generating a significant amount of biomarker work, not only to really understand the ARDS population and who is suffering from it more in depth, but also to find specific patient populations within that ARDS group that may benefit from a specific drug. Maybe not all host-directed therapeutics will work in all patients suffering from ARDS, but if we can find that one that works with that one drug, that may lead to success. Moving on to the pre-exposure prophylaxis space, we had to take a recent step back and really try and decide, what are we trying to accomplish here? And really what we're after is we really want to find a therapeutic that can be better than a vaccine at preventing an influenza infection, but also be cost effective. And when we did our market research and looked at the drugs that are already in the clinic, what we found is there's nothing out there right now. I mean, the monoclonal antibodies may have some promise in this area, but they're certainly not going to be cheaper than a vaccine. So we want to go maybe a little bit earlier in the research space and look at some of these newer technologies that are not quite ready for the clinic, such as the nucleic acid expressed monoclonal antibodies, the siRNAs, or the locked nucleic acids. And what we like about these drugs is that they are much cheaper and faster to manufacture. And they're programmable, right? So especially when you're talking about an RNA, you can simply flip the sequence and you have a new drug ready to go very quickly. But some of the disadvantages that we've seen is that they have a very short half-life. Most of them rely on intravenous administration, which is absolutely a problem when you're talking about a pandemic response. And then there's this lack of broad-spectrum activity, because you got to remember, I want activity not only against seasonal influenza, but also pandemic strains, which is a fairly high bar. So we really want you guys to be on the lookout for things that we're going to be trying to improve, not only a specific drug in this space, but maybe looking at how we can improve these drugs as a platform. And last but not least is the broad-spectrum antivirals, of which, again, we're kind of taking another step back because we do have a number of different antivirals already approved for the treatment of influenza. So really the question is what if we're talking about not just flu, but any respiratory virus? Can we find a drug that can treat any respiratory virus in an outpatient setting? That brings up a whole other number of questions of like, well, how do we prove it? And how do you compare between a rhinovirus infection and an influenza infection, which both of those diseases have very different disease courses? So if you have ideas in this space, if you, one, have a drug that looks promising in this area, or two, have an idea of how to proceed, please come and let me know. So in summary, I'm actually out of time, so I'm going to go very quickly. I just want to say that, for our response program, we're really, we work with our partners, to be prepared for the next pandemic. And the vaccine program is really looking to have a better influenza vaccine available for everyone. And the therapeutics program is also working, against, finding drugs for the entire spectrum of disease. And again, just like the CBRN portfolio is really focused on meeting the needs of the BARDA strategic plan. And so to learn more, please check out our number of different sessions that we have tomorrow to learn more about all of these programs. And then also come and talk to us. This is the Influenza Division's leadership team, and we will all be at the networking session this afternoon. So please come and talk to us, and thank you so much for your attention.